But I carried on bashing the phones, so off my own bat, I just hit the phones, and it just happened very very quickly. All the businesses I've sold, I never employed a broker or an advisor. I can bite back if necessary.
Following interviews with John Knight, Managing Director and founder of Strategic Business Exits, where John and his team help business owners prepare, plan, and execute an exit. John is a serial entrepreneur himself. He has scaled businesses, bought companies, and he has sold 6 of his own ventures in the past. This proved to be one of the most insightful conversations that I've had recently, and I hope that you enjoy it too. First question is obviously you've your first business that you've sold and that you acquired originally. I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was PNM, right? Was that the first deal? Yeah, I mean, it would be great to just find out a little bit more about that. Like, how did that come about?
I went. I mean, my background is I'm trained in graphic design. I've got a BA honours in graphic design, but specialised in illustration. So I was a trained illustrator, but I was a reasonably good all round creative, and basically I went freelance very quickly. Had a couple of jobs in some small agencies for about 2 or 3 years, and then went freelance in the early 80s, which was a bit fraught because we just had a baby and just taken on a mortgage. So it was a bit of a risk. But the reality was I was earning more in my spare time than I was at work because I'd started doing some freelance on the side. And it just made sense to concentrate on that. So I went freelance. And one of my clients, I used to work for ad agencies and also direct corporate clients as well, like Cadbury's and people like that. So I was based in Birmingham. And one of the agencies I worked with was PNM Advertising, and that had been established for about 30 years, I think, about that at that time. And it was originally set up it was specifically set up to do cinema advertising. Of course, that was dying a death even in the 80s. And the turnover was about 300 grand, and the MD at the time, Robert Bertram, had gone in there basically with a view to buying the business. When I started working with him, we got on really well. We were a good team, and eventually Robert, myself, and another chap called Peter Morell, who was from a big agency in Birmingham called Cogent Elliott, that was the biggest agency in Birmingham at the time. We got together and bought the business for 30 grand. So we raised our own money to do that. We also raised £100,000 of working capital from the business expansion scheme, which basically incentivized people to put money into businesses. It was a tax incentive. So we raised 100,000. I think it was from about 15 people. And we grew the business very rapidly, gained a lot of clients very quickly. And to cut a long story short, after about 3 years, we were approached by one of our clients they wanted to basically buy 25% of the shares. And we said no, because that's going to restrict our ability to sell the business later or do whatever we want. Anyway, basically, they came back and said, okay, well, we'll be interested in buying the whole thing. So in the end, in 1988, I forget what month it was. I think it was October 88. It was October 88. They bought 100% of the shares. That was the first transaction I'd been through. So I suppose it was two really, because I did an MBO. It was an MBO MBI because although Robert was employed in P&M, so it was a buyout as far as he was concerned. As far as I was concerned, and Peter, it was an MBI because we were buying in. So we did that, and then we sold. So it was two transactions involved with that company. Now we achieved our earn out, so we got about $1.5 million for it in the end, which was in the 1988. Obviously, was I don't know what the equivalent would be now, but it was obviously in those days. It was a nice consideration. The only downside was that capital gains was 40%. Yeah, so that was a bit of a blow. But anyway,
I'm very curious about like the process of, obviously, you bought the business, but there was that period where you had to grow it, right? Mm-hmm. So what did you find was key? And I think like for anyone watching who's a business owner who's trying to grow from, whatever, 5-6 figures to 7 figures and so on, like what was the process of actually getting the business to that stage?
Well, prior to joining P&M, as I said, I was freelance, and what I'd done basically, I lived in Tamworth, which is a small town north of Birmingham. I had a job in Lichfield, and basically during my lunch breaks, I would basically you get the local business phone directory, because of course this is pre-internet, and I literally went through the business directory, and phoned every business apart from retailers, and I didn't do that. But I phoned every single manufacturer, engineering business, or whatever. And as I said before, within 3 months of doing that, I was earning more in my spare time than I was at work. So I literally bashed the phones, went to see people after work in the evenings or weekends, and built the freelance work up very quickly. And I did the same with ad agencies. So I'd phone ad agencies or write to them, and then go and see them and get work that way. So I basically carried on doing that when we bought P&M, and almost created my own profit center within P&M. Although I was the creative director, Robert was the MD, and Peter was more of a numbers man. He was a very experienced account director, um, completely different background to me. But I carried on bashing the phones. So off my own bat, I just hit the phones, and it just happened very very quickly. I mean, obviously, if you're starting out and you've only got, I don't know, one client that you can go and talk to people and say, "I've got this client. Here's some work we've done for that one client." You've got to be pretty confident, and you've got to have some balls really to get to sit in front of another client and say, "Okay, I've only got one client, but if you give me your business, yeah, we'll do a good job." So it's not easy, but I think we were a credible team, obviously, and we were able to get ourselves on pitch lists for some significant companies like Marley Group, Thermalite, which actually became part of Marley in the end. Um, National Radio Phone, which is one of the first mobile phone companies. John Partridge Country Clothing, which was quite big in the 80s. Actually, it was a small competitor of Barber, and so we were able to build a credible team with a credible presentation. It wasn't easy, but it was just a numbers game. And what I've found throughout my career is, and it's not scientific. This is just me telling you how I think it is. You make 10 phone calls, you get one meeting. You have 10 meetings, you get one client. That's how it works. Obviously, in this day and age, you've got things like LinkedIn and social media and so on to kind of influence people. And obviously, that's quite powerful. LinkedIn works very well for me. Um, but um, I don't think you can beat the old fashioned ways of just picking the phone up. Um, my advice would be pick the phone up, because everybody emails. Emails they're just trash these days. Unless you can make it really, really pertinent and stand out, it just gets buried in all the other hundreds of emails that everybody gets every day. So emails for me they're very good if you've got a very specific offer for a very specific audience. Obviously, it's fine, and it's fine to do that in conjunction with other things, obviously. But you've got to make it pertinent and meaningful to the end user. It's not all about you. It's about the end. It's about the end customer. So you've got to make it, and that's what you have to do with advertising. That's my background. You have to make whatever advertising you do pertinent to the target audience, not pertinent to you personally, or even the client. To be honest, I would recommend bash the phones. Stand out a bit, do something different, send some oddball mailings even. There was a great apocryphal story. I'm sure it was true, but it was a story that went around in the 80s, of a company that produced car radiators in the 70s. And of course, around the Midlands, there were still quite a few car manufacturers at that time. And this guy basically, because he knew exactly the people he needed to talk to. He was the buyers of the obviously Talbot, or whoever BL, Austin Rover, whatever they were called in those days. And what he did, he sent out, I think it was half a dozen, only a handful of beautiful models of the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost car, big model, but the radiator was missing off the front. So this thing was worth a lot of money, really, and basically sent a letter with it saying, pleased to present you with this. If you want the radiator, you're going to have a meeting with me, and I'll bring it with me. And I thought that was brilliant, and that's a really good example of how to think outside the box a little bit, and get in front of people. Now, obviously, that's a kind of extreme example, but I think things like that can work if you've got a small audience you want to target. So yeah, that's how we did it. We just bashed the phones. Having proved the model at PNM of basically just bashing the phones and being able to grow a business fairly quickly. When I started my next venture, which was basically a corporate design company, I employed really smart PAs and also graduates, and basically train them to interact with people on the phone, try and get them engaged in a meaningful conversation. Yeah, be pleasant to them and all the rest of it. But obviously that was a secondary thing, just to get them hooked, really. And once they got an appointment, we would take them with us, so they could learn the ropes in terms of how to present and deal with clients and so on. And these women were so smart. I mean, they really were. Within 6 months, they were generally running their own accounts. So if we won a new account because of their call, we would bring them on. Obviously, the first project we'd handle it ourselves. They would shadow us, and then eventually they'd go and see the clients on their own, and they picked it up really quickly. And in fact, some of these people have gone on to have their own agencies and consultancies. Even now, they're still out there doing it. So that worked really well. It's all about you do buy from people. It's a cliche, but it's true. So you can establish a relationship, meaningful relationship, but make it clear that you can actually make their life easier. I mean, with the corporate clients, it was all about making their life easier. That was really what turned them on. So if we could provide solutions that made their life, they ticked, they could tick the project off, then that was great for them. So yeah, that was what we did after P&M.
I guess it's exactly that. I guess it's asking the right questions and knowing what the problem is that they're trying to solve. Because if you're trying to solve a problem that's not there, then you're going to fall short, right?
Yeah, there's no point just going in and saying, yeah, we can do your design work. It's a bit like now. I mean, we all get bombarded with, digital marketing agencies who can do our website, they can do our SEO and so on. Well, what's different about you? Why should I engage with you instead of the other 20 that have emailed me today?
In terms of building that team up, you're saying that you had a lot of talented people who were able to take that accountability and basically take their own, lead their own accounts going forward. When you were hiring the people, like, was there anything in particular you were looking for, or like any particular hiring process that you had in place, or was it just the case of throw the people kind of in a deep water, see if they can swim? If they can, then great, they're the right fit for us.
No, we had quite a stringent interview regime. I mean, intelligence was the primary thing, and that's fairly easy to assess. And personality, of course, because if you can be intelligent and be the most obnoxious person in the world, a bit like me. But
you've never come across as obnoxious to me, John.
You haven't crossed me. Yeah, okay. I can bite back if necessary, but I think anybody in business has to be a bit like that, really. But no, they had to have obviously a pleasant personality, and that was it, really. None of them had any kind of background in our industry. One of the best ones we took on was a PA to a sales director of a brick manufacturer. No relationship to what we were doing at all. That didn't matter. And the same with the graduates. I mean, we had people who'd done. I think one of the girls had done a thesis on the onion family. Completely irrelevant to what we were doing, but she was very, very bright. So we did employ chaps as well, but to be honest with you, they weren't as successful.
One of the things that you did mention earlier as well was when you bought that first business, it was with the business expansion scheme. So just for the viewers who don't know about it, is that something that's still around, or it's no longer available?
Do you know what? I honestly don't know, Boris. I don't think it's around in the form that it was then. There have been subsequent incentives for investment, and I'm pretty sure there are some out there, but I'm not enough of an expert on that to advise, really. To be honest, in this day and age, you can just Google it, and whatever's available will come up, or to somebody who's more contemporary, But I'm not aware of any. We don't tend to work with buyers that have ever needed that kind of fundraising. And I think it'd be too long-winded, I think, to try and do that to acquire a business anyway. It would take so long to do.
In terms of your other acquisitions, did you then use other instruments for that, like to raise the funds, or was it always sort of on a case-by-case basis? It was always very different.
We didn't actually raise any funds to do any of the other acquisitions. So PNM was the only one we actually raised funds for. We acquired, when I did my company after PNM, which was Qualcomm, we acquired an agency up in Knutsford after the first year, and we basically acquired that for nothing. They were in trouble basically, so it was a bit of a turnaround project. So yeah, no money changed hands. It was purely a turnaround, and we did the deal, but it didn't really go anywhere, to be honest. But it was worth a try because they had a particular niche. It was particularly a specialist business, so it was worth trying to try and salvage it, but we couldn't do it really. So that went by the wayside, and then the other two acquisitions were funded through basically releasing the cash in the business that the directors had built up. So that became the down payment, if you like, for want of a better word. And both sellers were perfectly happy with that, and we paid them off over a couple of years.
Did you have prior relationships with those sellers before approaching them?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, well, with one of them, it was actually a client of mine, and I'd got them to heads of terms on 4 occasions with 4 different buyers, and it just wouldn't happen for one reason or another. Basically, myself and a partner a chap who knew very well. We decided to basically say to them, look, because the important thing for that particular client, and they made no bones about it, the important thing for them was to get their cash out. That was their main criteria, and we facilitated that for them. And to be honest, it was a steel business actually, so nothing that I've ever been involved in before. And the second one came about because they were literally working in the same building, another company working in the same building, and the other wing, effectively, who were another steel business, but in a completely different discipline. And I got talking to the owner, and she made it clear. It was a lady. She made it clear she was looking to sell, and I said, well, we could do a similar deal to what we did with the other guys, and again, she was happy to do it. So we ended up with these 2 steel businesses, but we had to replace the management teams because they were very much owner managed, these businesses, and that was a really, really fraught process. And we did get together a very good team, but in the end, the war in Ukraine actually probably was the thing that killed it, because the volatility in the market with steel prices was really difficult to manage, and because we'd leveraged the business to do the deal, we basically went for invoice discounting. It just made it non-viable, really. And although we actually sold the businesses to the management in the end, but they didn't. They only lasted about a year after we sold it to them, unfortunately. So it was an interesting project, but it was very exhausting. And I think obviously these people run these courses to say how you can just go out there and buy a business for nothing. Can you buy a business for nothing? Yes, you can. But you have to have credibility. You have to deal with the seller, their advisors, who are all very protective of their clients. You have to deal with lenders who, if you clearly haven't got the background that gives them any comfort, then you're not going to get anywhere. So a lot of these people are out there trying to buy businesses will never be able to do it. Some of them do, obviously, but a lot of them won't. You've got to have credibility with all these people, and and buying a business is not something to be done lightly. It's a big commitment, even if you're not actually putting any money in.
One of the things that you did also bring up was buying a business that's obviously not your expertise necessarily. So how would you say you approach that? Because obviously, you might have to buy a business at some point to grow the existing enterprise, but you may not know as much about that business. So what would you say are some of the like pitfalls like to avoid there?
Well, I think the biggest pitfall for us was buying a business that we had no experience of. I mean, I didn't that didn't worry me too much at the start because my expertise is marketing, sales and marketing. That's my background. So it doesn't matter to me whether it's steel or whether it's oranges. The principles are the same. So I felt that I could bring that to the party. My business partner was from a financial background, so we could bring that to the party. But we needed to employ a team that knew the steel industry, and we did do that very successfully. But they'd never run a business before, these guys. So I think my overriding lesson from doing that was that if you're gonna acquire a business that you don't know, or in a sector that you don't know, try and buy one that's already got the management in place, the secondary management beneath the owners, because that will make life a lot easier. But obviously, you've still got to be able to get on with those people and make sure they don't leave after the day after the acquisition. So, it's again, it comes down to personality and all the rest of it. But I think that's the key thing. If you've got to build a management team in a sector that you're not fully knowledgeable about, I think that's a very difficult task.
With the management team staying on as well after the owner leaves, like what have you found are good incentives? Like I'm sure when you have these discussions with the clients that you work with now, when you were acquiring businesses as well, what is it that you can put into place to make sure that the management team actually does stay on? Because obviously, a lot of the times it's the management team that's worked with their owner for years and years. They have that relationship, and when they leave, it's a big shock to the system, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people start thinking, well, maybe I should move on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously it's a bit unsettling for staff when a business is sold. I mean, when I sold my businesses in the past, the staff have always been very concerned, quite understandably. And basically, what happens is that it turns out really well for some and not others. I mean, some of my ex-staff members went on to become directors of the company that acquired us, but the others left. So um, basically, what we say to business owners, if you're trying to sell, is you've got to decide when you're going to tell the team, obviously, the key personnel. And you can either tell them once the deal's done, or you can tell them just before, or you can involve them from day one. And it's a very difficult decision, and you've got to be very mindful that it could backfire on you if you tell them day one. But on the other hand, it might work. I think it's horses for courses. It depends how well the owner gets on with the team and how confident they feel that these people are going to stay and support them. We've had quite a few instances where we've agreed that what they should do is give them a financial incentive. So, for example, if you've got a really key employee, maybe involve them in, especially if that key employee is the FD, because that's really difficult. If you need to dig into the finances of the business even before due diligence, say, which you would, if you've got an FD and you keep going back asking questions, it's very difficult to, you've got to explain why you want all this info all of a sudden. And these people aren't stupid. So if you've got a key person like that, I think the best way is a financial incentive. And that can be done various ways. I mean, you could do an official share option scheme, for example, where they don't actually have shares, but they get the option to buy the shares at the point of sale. And obviously, hopefully, that they buy them, but they sell them at the same time for a profit. So that's one. I mean, that's obviously quite a complicated exercise, but it can be done. The other is to promise them an amount of money at completion, and then probably a second amount of money once you've done your earn out, if there's an earn out to do. So if you've got a year's earn out to do, you give them an incentive to stick around at completion. It's got to be significant, really, to make them do that, or incentivize them to do that, and then another chunk when you do your earn out and you leave. And that to me is, money talks, and that's what it's all about, really. Generally, not every time, but certainly a lot of the time, the acquisition can be an opportunity for good people, because if, for example, a smaller company is being bought by a much larger group, then clearly it opens up a career path that you wouldn't otherwise have, potentially. Which is, as I say, what happened to some of my people when we sold to bigger companies. So I think you have to try and sell that dream, if you like, as well.
How do you find the conversation differs where, for example, a company might be sold to a private equity firm? Because, of course, private equity firms, they can come in and sometimes they replace the team, right? Because they want to have their own management team in place. So what do you, I guess, what safeguards are there for that not to happen? Or if it is going to happen, how do you go about the process? Because it's a very different process opposed to, for example, selling to a strategic buyer.
To be perfectly honest, Boris, we've never sold to a private equity firm. The mandates that we tend to get aren't really big enough, so that problem's never arisen. But I am aware. I am aware, obviously, that the private equity will quite often want to put their own team in, and yeah. But we've never dealt with them.
When, I guess, in that sense, then when you have that conversation with them in terms of what is the path you want to take as a seller, and you say, okay, you have these different options in terms of selling your business, who you sell it to, and what the structure is going to be. So if you don't mind, like, what are some of the, like, let's say, like, top 2-3 options that you usually kind of go and decide to go down that route when it comes to it?
Yeah, I think with our clients, there's only usually two options. As I said, one is a new owner manager, especially for the smaller businesses. We tend to deal with businesses between 1 million and 15 million turnover, that kind of area. And obviously at the lower end, they tend to be owner managed, and they can often sell to another owner manager. So an individual who's looking to buy himself a job, really, effectively, or create or doesn't want to start off from scratch. They want a platform to build on. And then the other option, of course, is a trade buyer, and they tend to happen on the slightly bigger. So I would say the cutoff point is probably up to 2 million, and then beyond 2 million, I think it's more likely going to be a trade buyer than a private individual. I suppose investors are a different buyer group that we've encountered. So it might be a small conglomerate, to use an old-fashioned word, where they've acquired, I don't know, half a dozen companies looking to bolt on another one and so on. So they're out there as well. Obviously, we deal with them. But if it's a smaller business, we generally say that this business isn't suitable for an investor. If the returns and the management, if the returns aren't high enough and there isn't a management team in place, it doesn't really suit an investor.
And in terms of the rise of, I don't know if you've seen it with the business you work with, but there seems to be a shift towards more and more companies doing EOTs.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, we do put that on the table as an option. It doesn't suit every business, obviously. I think it tends to suit professional businesses like solicitor firms, legal firms, architectural practices, that type of thing. It can work in other businesses, but I've heard some horror stories of EOTs failing. It's like any other acquisition; it can fail. And also, if you've got a very ambitious management team or manager, you're taking away the opportunity for them to do an MBO. They've got to share everything with everybody in effectively a commune, if you like, almost. That doesn't go down well with senior managers sometimes. I think you've got to be careful how you deal with that, because clearly, although they'd be part of the OT, they wouldn't really have any more. Yeah, okay, there's some tax benefits and so on, but and profit sharing once you've paid off the owner, which could take 5 years. So it's quite a it's not to be entered into lightly, and we don't advise business owners to do it purely for the tax benefit either. It's got to be the right option. We've never been through an EOT. We've discussed it with lots of business owners, and for one reason or another, it's not happened. Certainly not, not in the 9 years I've been doing this, 9.5 years. But we have done valuations for EOTs and other. In fact, valuations is something we're pushing quite hard now for various reasons. But so EOTs, great option for the right type of business, I think.
So let's say, someone who's watching this is a first-time business owner and they get a buyer approaching them and saying, look, like I'm happy to offer you X for your business. This is before they even view the accounts. They just say, look, like I'm happy to put, my money where my mouth is. What do you advise to them in terms of the next steps? Do they organize the conversation with the buyer, or should they take a different route and be a bit more cautious when someone goes, look, like I want to buy your business?
Well, it's an interesting point because of all the businesses I've sold, I never employed a broker or an advisor, probably wrongly, actually. Obviously, I would say that, wouldn't I? Now I'm doing what I'm doing. But I think it can be a minefield if you don't know what you're doing. You can get very easily ripped off, for want of a better word. And these guys are or can be ruthless, and they'll try all the tricks in the book to try and get the price down or get you to fund the deal through vendor finance and so on. So my advice would be talk to a mediator, a broker, an M&A advisor. Obviously, talk to your accountant as well. I mean, most accountants are pretty clued up on who the cowboy brokers are, if you like. So I think talk to your accountant, talk to other people. Don't just engage with these people, and try and if you're going to sell, do it properly and try and get a proper process in place where you can get some competitive tension between one or two or three buyers. Don't just go with the first option.
And is that kind of just, that brings a conversation to your current venture, which is, strategic business exit. So what was the reason behind actually starting the firm? Because you've obviously, you're a serial entrepreneur yourself, you've bought businesses, sold businesses as well. What was the reason why you decided to shift into that field?
Well, it was serendipity, really. Basically, when I sold my last business I think it was about 2012. Basically, I jumped in to help my wife and son, who were running a garden design landscaping business, and so I operated that with them for about 3 or 4 years, just on project management. So I just dealt with the suppliers, dealt with the clients on the costing side of things, managed the teams, and so on. So it was completely different for me, but that's fine. And in the end, we decided maybe we should try and sell the business because both my wife and my son had had enough at that point. And I decided to speak to a broker for the first time, actually. And I found a local broker who came to see me, and we got talking. Obviously, I told him about my background and so on. And basically, he came back to me soon after and said, I'm thinking of selling my territory because it was a franchise. He was actually the MD as well as having a territory. He was the MD of the business, and it was most of the West Midlands and Black Country, which is where I know. Of course, there's a lot of business in that area. And then, because long story short, basically, I bought the franchise off him. So I went to him to sell a business and ended up buying a business, really. So I bought the franchise because I thought it would actually be quite a nice way to earn a living into retirement, and it would be a good use of my experience, obviously, because I thought I knew a lot about selling and buying businesses, but it very quickly dawned on me that I didn't actually know that much. And although the franchise was good, it was very much geared around micro businesses, really, and that wasn't really what interested me. I was interested in more sort of traditional businesses, proper tangible manufacturing, engineering, that type of thing. And in the first year, I actually did the biggest deal that had been done in the franchise, not just my territory, but the whole franchise in 40 years. And that deal was only 1.75 million value, but it was the biggest one that had been done in the group. And that shows you the sort of level that they were working at. It was fine, but it gave me a good grounding, made some good contacts. But being an entrepreneur, I want to do my own thing, and in the end, I decided not to renew the franchise, and I'd already set up SBE because part of the franchise you had to have a limited company, you had to call it something. So I called it Strategic Business Exits for obvious reasons, and I kept the business going once I'd left the franchise. I had to have a year's out to grass basically because I wasn't allowed to compete. So I used that year just building up my network before I came back the following year with 6 mandates, and then basically started again from there. That was what 2000. Where are we now? It was probably 4 years ago that happened. So yeah, and since then I've worked with or taken on 3 associates who are all self-employed. They're not employed by me. We've all got different specialisms. I mean, Robert is similar to me. He sold his own businesses, very big business actually, but he's self-educated himself and got himself an ACCA qualification in business valuations. So that's quite useful to give us credibility on our valuations. Chris, he's sold his own businesses, but they were tech businesses. So he's got a completely different background to me and Rob. And Carl, who has never sold a business, but he's a very good marketing guy. And basically what he does for us is so Rob will do the research to try and find buyers proactively. And Carl will then follow those up in terms of an approach. And that's how it works. So as a team, we hopefully get people engaged, and then we find a buyer that way. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's how it happened.
Very interesting. I think it's funny how things also come together eventually, because you know there are lots of moving blocks, bits and pieces, but then it just makes sense when you look back on it, which is which is great. But it's also survivor's bias. For some people it doesn't work out, for some people it does, but then at the end it looks like a very smooth journey, but it's always a zigzag, isn't it?
Oh, it is, yeah, and it's not for everybody, to be honest. Some people are just cut out to be employees because that's their comfort zone, and that's fine. Without employees, nobody would be able to have a business, so that's obviously fine. But if you have got an entrepreneurial streak in you, you've got to take a risk. You can't get anywhere without taking a risk, and if you're not prepared to take the risk, then you're not going to get anywhere. It's simple as that.
In terms of what you've seen over the last, well, let's say, almost 40 years or so, right? And how the landscape has changed. There are changes to coming to inheritance tax now as well, which I think you've written quite a lot about. So where are you seeing the industry head now? Like, what are you seeing as perhaps the next 5 years, like how it might develop? Obviously, it's unpredictable, but what's your take on it?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of talk over the past few years about the boomer grey wave, or whatever you want to call it, of people who set up businesses when they were young, and now they're getting to my age and they want to, or even younger than me, wanting to retire. And yeah, there are some of those out there, but it's not exactly we're not exactly awash with them. We're talking to business owners in their 70s and 80s. It's unbelievable, really. One day they're going to leave their business, whether they sell it or whether they keel over and die. They're going to leave their business, and they've got to leave it in the most efficient way possible for their family, really, assuming they've got a family. And I think this inheritance tax change is going to have a massive impact, because clearly if your business is going to become part of your estate, that has huge implications for your family. Obviously, who's going to decide on the value that the tax is going to be worked out on? That's one thing. HMRC will probably, no doubt, fight that valuation if they think it's been skewed to the lower end. And then what's a business worth when the owner dies anyway? If they're the owner manager, especially. So how is a business? Let's say you've got a tax liability of £1 million. Has your family got the ability to pay £1 million off over 5-10 years? That's let's assume the business can carry on without the owner who's died. Is there enough in that business to pay the tax? Bearing in mind you've got to get the money out and pay tax to get it out in the first place. It's going to be an absolute minefield, and that's one of the reasons why we're pushing our business valuation service, because there's going to be a massive requirement for business valuations if this happens, and it's looking like it will happen, obviously. So I think that's huge. So I think there are lots and lots of reasons now for business owners and wealth advisors and accountants to sit around the table and thrash out exactly what the future looks like for them. And they really need to get a grip on that, because if they die and leave the family with those kind of bills to pay, I think there's going to be a lot of very, very bad stories coming out of that. So I would say that's the that's one of the most critical things that business owners need to look at now. That's the problem with government. They just don't think about the implications of all this chopping and changing on people's lives. It's so unsettling, and there's no stability. You don't know where, one year they're telling us to buy diesel cars, the next year they're telling us that you're evil if you buy a diesel car. So that's government for you. It's they are useless, basically.
I mean, there is that conversation that, yes, like people are leaving because of inheritance tax, people are leaving because of the the tax on the wealthy now. People start businesses because not just because they want to earn money, but because also that's their passion, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's still a big percentage of people that will still do it, but I suppose as you start to remove all the incentives and you basically punish someone for starting a business, that becomes a long-term issue.
Well, I think there's two things really, Boris. I think the incentive is one aspect, but I think the risk is the other. So the counter to the incentive is the risk that you take to set up a business. So obviously, when I started, it was the dumb thing to take out an overdraft, and they'd have a charge on your house and God knows what. That's a big leap. You've got to have a massive leap of you've got to be really confident to take that leap of faith, and it puts your house at jeopardy, your family at jeopardy, and so on. It's not to be taken lightly. Now, obviously, there are other options to overdrafts these days, but they are becoming tighter. Even when banks have got asset lending in place or invoice discounting, they still want you tied in. It's not easy, and so the risks of running a business, you've got to weigh up the risk with the potential benefits, and the benefits are being reduced, nibbled away at every budget. And to be fair, the Tories did the same. They nibbled away at it, and you've got to really stand back and say, is it worth taking the risk to hopefully achieve what I want to achieve? Obviously, as an entrepreneur, I'd say, yeah, if you want to do it, but I think it's probably more onerous now than it's ever been. Not only that, the employment laws, of course, are lots more stringent than they used to be. It's all geared around the employee. I agree with some of the protections, but I think some have gone too far. It's very difficult to get rid of people if they're not performing or they're just disruptive in the workplace, it does happen. So it's a very, very very, very big step not to be taken lightly.
I mean, my last question is, and I understand it's a bit of a generic one, but if you did have to pick one thing that you're speaking to a business owner and they're thinking of selling the business, what would you say is the number one thing that they should address?
Make yourself redundant. So unless you've already got a really good management team in place, make sure you work your way out of the owner manager mindset and start to become more of an investor mindset where you're the business. You're not in the business. You're actually outside the business, looking in on doing the strategic work and so on, but that you're not physically in there cleaning the bins out and sorting out the car park, which is what most small business owners do. So that'd be my advice: make yourself redundant.